What's up, everyone? Welcome to the Mid Convo Podcast. It's your boys, Ed and Paul, back with another episode. What we talking about today, Paul?
Yeah, let's get it. I'm so stoked, Ed. We're talking about the difference between an amateur and a professional. Whether it's you're a photographer, videographer, even if you're a graphic designer, welcome.
Yo, and I'm not trying to hurt anyone's feelings on this episode, but if you're listening, not trying to say you're an amateur, not trying to say you're a pro, but this will be a great episode if you've kind of been wondering whether or not you're cut out to be in this industry, in this creative industry. So let's not waste any more time and roll intro music.
Ed, let's start by us laughing. Ready?
What?
All right, Ed, I got a question for you.
What's up?
Let's go back to Ed circa, I'm going to say mid-2000s.
Sheesh.
My guy, I knew in middle school and high school that you were creative because you're running a pretty successful videography business right now.
Mm-hmm.
But what was it like when you first started? Did people take you serious? What did your parents think about it? Share a little bit about that.
Yeah, it's a good question. I would have to say in the beginning, your boy was an amateur. Like it wasn't for real. I mean, like everyone, I was getting into creative work at a time when Instagram wasn't really like people, that wasn't a job. Social media influencer, brands weren't really on social media like that at the time. So it wasn't really a job. At the time, it was a side hustle. It was a side hobby, side passion, whatever you want to call it. And I was going to school, middle school, high school throughout then. I had a camera, but by no means was I trying to make money with it. I was studying to do business and then eventually wanted to do medical, then went back to business. You know, you guys know how it goes. When you're in school, you're kind of back and forth with what you want to do. And my mom and dad, they weren't super pressuring me to do anything necessarily, but photography was kind of out of the question. They were like, yo, you can't make money really doing that. So I was initially studying to do pharmacy or like optometry. This is like Ed of high school.
These are some big words.
Yeah, it is. And then I went to college, but then took some human anatomy and physiology classes. I just gotta say, your boy should not be a doctor, okay? That would be terrible. And so I switched my major to business. And so basically, I didn't really, I guess, tap into the creative side of things until well after middle school, well after high school, and even after college is when I started to even dance around the idea of it potentially becoming a professional job.
Wow.
Yeah.
For those that are listening, how long have you been doing what you're doing?
Been doing freelance / running my own business as a creator for 4 years now, but I've been kind of doing it as a job, I guess, for about 7 years.
Okay.
Yeah.
And for a little bit more context, I want to speak on your parents for a minute.
Yeah.
So they're entrepreneurs.
Yep.
Did that influence you taking that step and kind of going all in? Because, you know, for a lot of amateurs, if you will, people that are looking at it as a side hustle, it might be tougher to take that leap if you don't have those other influences like you did.
Yeah, that's a good question. Honestly, my parents, they are entrepreneurs, but in a different sense because my mom and dad were from the East Coast and they worked kind of regular corporate jobs for a while. My mom worked in an optometry office as like the front, and my dad worked like a different jobs. Like he did HVAC, he did a deli, he did a bunch of things. And then when we moved to the West Coast, they wanted to open a coffee shop, like a drive-through espresso stand. But then it failed terribly. Like it was a bad investment of their money. And even me and my parents talk about it to this day. But then they eventually wanted to open a sandwich shop because my dad had some experience in the deli space back on the East Coast. And so they opened a sandwich shop, their own business. They basically had enough money to open it. And if it didn't work out, we would have been in a really bad position. And I found this out later, like years after.
Wow.
And so my mom and dad.
So that's good to know. That's good to know because I love hearing the background for anyone who, you know, started as a side hustle and is now turning it into their full-time job. Because there's people listening that are probably like, I'm passionate about this. You know, some are like, I haven't made money with this yet. Some are saying I've made money with this yet. And I think what we're going to get into in this episode, which I'm so stoked about, is there a moment where there's almost like a switch where it's like, I'm a professional now? And also like, does that label matter? So I kind of want to pick that apart. We can go back and forth here, but like, what comes to mind when you think of someone who's an amateur? And then what comes to mind when you think of someone who's a professional?
Honestly, from a amateur and professional standpoint, I was reading this in a book called The War of Art by Stephen Pressfield. But essentially, an amateur is someone, there's a few parameters, right? But the first thing that come to mind is an amateur is not, you don't do this thing, this creative, whatever it is in the industry. You don't do it for money. You're probably in the amateur field if you're not doing it for money, if you don't show up every day, if you're not showing up every week for it, if you only do it when you feel like it. Those are things that kind of maybe lean towards it being a hobby. And then a professional is someone who does it for work, shows up every single day, whether they want to or not, and has knowledge, like more knowledge than would say the average person in this, meaning like friends and family. Like for us, it's photography, videography, right? Like we have more knowledge than, let's say, our aunt or uncle on this topic. And if that is the case in what you're doing, you're probably leaning more towards the professional side. But I think the biggest thing is the money aspect. And if you're making money doing it, that's probably a clear indicator. What do you think?
Yeah, I think it's a money thing. My mind goes towards baseball because I grew up loving baseball. I thought it was going to be on like a MLB team.
Yo, what?
maybe a different life. But it's like in baseball, after college, there's amateur baseball, right? Single A, double A, triple A. And it's like those guys get paid a little bit, but they're also, like taking a huge pay cut, hoping that they're going to make the major leagues. But when you get to the major leagues, you're a professional athlete. So I think for us as content creators, and I mean, it really doesn't depend on, it doesn't matter what trade that you have. I think there is a point where money increases, money starts coming in and you start to see, wow, like this is something that I can go all in on. And you don't have to be an entrepreneur to do it, because I have friends that work at agencies that are photographers that are professionals. They're incredible. So I think it is a money thing. I think it's, back to the amateur thing. I've had a lot of photographers over the years that I've coached ask me, they're like, I'm scared to take the leap, and I asked them, I'm like, well, have you been able to prove that you've been able to make money in your craft? And they're like, yeah, totally. I'm like, well, I think the next step is to figure out what your goal is for income for the year. And are you going to be able to produce that with this craft or this position? And then also I think it comes with the amount of years that you've invested into this trade, right? Like I've been doing this for 10 years. I've been shooting for 10 years, but dude, the first 3-4 years, your boy was an amateur. Like I took pay cut. Like I lost money, I should say.
Yeah.
Shooting concerts, I had to pay for parking. If your boy was hungry, he's hitting the concession stand. And then sometimes I'd be convinced to buy like a band t-shirt. So like I'd get home and like be editing on Photoshop with some like free, Photoshop presets actually. And I'd be like, I got like $100 in my bank account.
Yo.
And then I would go work my normal job, which was I was a personal care assistant for a Down syndrome adult. So like that was my job, my side hustle, and the thing that my parents looked at as like a cute hobby was photography, until I started making money, which I felt like came with getting my reps in, right?
No, dude, let's go back a little bit to, I guess, amateur Paul during that time. What would you like? How would you like explain that scene a little bit, right? Like, what are you shooting on? What are you doing? And also, I guess the question that I have for you is, if someone's listening right now and they feel like, yo, that's me. Like, I was in that position. I have a job. I feel like I'm Paul, let's say 10 years ago. Where would you say the shift happened for you? Like what or I guess like what parts of what you learned during that time was crucial to what you know now?
Yeah, that's so good. Honestly, I think it's just getting out and actually doing it. So instead of sitting at my computer, sitting at home and complaining about leads not coming in, I'm like, I am literally going to do the Michael Jordan approach but him with the basketball, me with my camera, and shoot every day. And it was helpful because the more reps I got in, the more people started taking me more serious, right? And that was a huge moment because then I was able to, the more I shot, people started popping up. It started with weddings and like senior portraits. And I had to navigate like, how do I price a senior photo shoot? Or how do I price a wedding? And that geared me up to going full time and starting my own media company where now I service fitness brands. But I think you brought up a really good point because for me, the switch was taking the leap from almost being an associate photographer, like pretty low tier out of agency, and seeing a huge demand for my work based off of my portfolio. And also just people rolling through my DMs on Instagram and Twitter. And I knew that I was going to be able to make at least, what I wanted to make for my annual income if I took that leap right then and there.
Yeah.
So I think that was a huge moment for me where I'm like, no, I'm an expert. Because sometimes I think people tie professional to expert in their craft. And I think that's totally true. I think an amateur is just someone who's growing in their craft.
Yeah. No, I think another point to add to that I just thought of was a very clear indicator of whether or not you're an amateur or a pro is if you're getting inquiries. Like if I'm talking, it doesn't have to be like big name clients. I'm talking friends and family. If you start having people who are close to you in your circle start asking you questions like, hey, I noticed you're working on this. Do you charge for that? Or how much do you charge? Like, that is a good indicator that you're leaning more, you're trying to become more of a professional. Because when people start asking you, how much do you charge? Do you do this kind of stuff? That's when I think is a great opportunity to start thinking about transitioning if you currently have a job. If people, if your email inbox is dry and you're working on passion projects and not a single person has been like, hey, how much do you charge? Or like what's your schedule like? Or they don't ask you those kind of questions. It may be a little early and you haven't really positioned yourself yet as someone that can do this for a living. That was for me. So, at least that's when I was like a pivotal thing.
What you said, I think we can break it down into, let's go back and forth. What are some things that if you're an amateur, as in it's a side hustle, it hasn't proven itself to provide actual solid income that you can live off of? Or, for me, I was at an agency as a associate producer. I could have stayed at that company, put 10 years in and become a senior, right? So you don't have to be an entrepreneur. What are some tips that we can give amateurs right now? And to be honest, the first one that comes to mind is look at people that are experts in your industry and learn from them. YouTube, courses, workshops, people in your city that you can tell are, maybe you're a wedding photographer, you want to be a wedding photographer and you've only, second shot. Literally go out and find the best wedding photographers in your area, figure out how you can help them or make their life easier, and just absorb knowledge because that's going to get you that much closer. So that's number one for me.
Yeah, no, that's a really good tip. I think number two for me that I've harped on this a couple times in other podcast episodes and I've talked about this, but you got to be brutally honest with your work, yo. This is what makes an amateur versus a pro. An amateur, in my opinion, if you're in that mode, you bask in your previous glory days, or you bask in what you've accomplished. Hey, you don't look at other people. Like Paul said, you don't look at other experts in the industry. You're kind of just looking at your own work, being like, oh, this is pretty good for me just being an amateur. If you say things like that, that's how you're gonna stay there. When I was first starting out, a good tip for me was I would shoot a video or I'd shoot a photo, and then I would look at these experts in the industry and I would literally side by side it on my computer and be like, okay, I'm gotta be real with myself. Is this even close to that world right now? And I would be honest and I'd be like, to be honest, this is trash. Mine is trash compared to this right here. And that was huge for me because that's what I was already thinking like a professional before I actually got there, because I was using that as a benchmark. You got to set the bar high, because if you set it low, that's where you're going to stay. And so I would say if you're an amateur right now, or at least you have those thoughts and you don't find yourself comparing your work often, I would say do it in a healthy way. You know what I mean? I don't want people to get caught in the comparison trap. But I can't tell you how many times I would meet people early on and they'd be like, yo, but this is pretty good for where I'm at, I think. And I'm like, yeah, I mean, if you want to take that approach and give yourself a pat on the back, that's fine. Like I think it's good that you are feeling confident about your work, but at the same time, is that what's going to land you that 5-figure client? Is that what's going to land you that 6-figure income? Be honest with yourself, like probably not, right? So
I like
that helped me a lot for sure.
No, that's good. Yeah, that's something I can definitely relate with, especially like kind of growing as a photographer, kind of being all over the place in that too. I think kind of the last tip I would give on the amateur side is obviously get your reps in, but you gotta be willing to invest in yourself. Like when I first started, I was using my dad's equipment. He had a Canon T2i, a couple lenses. The moment for me was when I invested into a Canon 60. I'm like, I'm going up.
The full frame.
And then it was mine. I paid for it. And there's something about having skin in the game. And that's kind of the tip I wanted to speak on is you can be the jack of all trades and have multiple side hustles. But if you want to be a professional and an expert, you got to stay in your lane, right? For me, when I first launched my media company, Ed, I don't know if you know this, we offered photography, video, web design, SEO, copywriting, brand identity, and hand lettering.
Oh my gosh, dude.
And people, people would meet me and I'd be like, oh yeah, we do everything. And they're like, oh, okay, cool. When I started telling them that I was a photographer, not even telling them what I shot, they're like, oh, Paul's the photographer. Like he's an expert at that. So that's just something to keep in mind is because you offer everything doesn't mean that you are, this incredible person and you people aren't going to see that as like a huge value add all the time.
Yeah.
So make sure that you're hyper focused on that one thing that you're going to be able to thrive in and also operate out of that creative zone.
Yeah. No, for sure. I think a good thing I picked up on what you just said was the skin in the game part really resonated with me because that's a good indicator too, like you said, of being an amateur or pro. Let's say $500 hit your bank account. Are you thinking about, is your first immediate reaction to reinvest into your business or your, photography in this sense or videography? Or are you thinking about buying those pair of shoes that you wanted? Or you're thinking about doing that thing? If you are immediately thinking to invest it into your business, I think that's what also defines a professional. Because we just had an episode on this regarding gear. But one thing I will say helped me was when I was first starting out, I would always be trying to upgrade my gear, right? Get a better camera, get a better lens. When I got my first L lens, bro, I was like, yo, I've got it made. I got the red ring around this lens. This is amazing. Because your boy was shooting on like the nifty 50 kit lens and stuff like that in the beginning. So, but when you show up to set or when you work with a client and you have gear, that also defines you as a professional. Like they'll be like, okay, this guy knows what he's doing. Like he's showing up with stuff that I would not have been able to source myself. Those are like some really clear indicators because if I hired someone and to be honest, they showed up with like not a full frame camera and a nifty 50 lens, I'm not going to say that they're like a bad photographer, but I'm just also kind of like, oh, they might still be like in the amateur phase.
Yeah.
So that's a good indicator too.
And if you don't have the gear, fake it till you make it, hit up that rental spot.
No, dude, that's a good tip.
Seriously.
Hit up the rental houses.
Done that. Yep.
Yeah.
Yeah, there's been many times where, in my early years, I was like, I don't have the money to pay for, this lighting kit. So I'd go and rent it from a spot in Minneapolis, which was very helpful in my start as a photographer. So let's talk about the switch to professional. And also I'm down to kind of touch on a few things like aha moments. Like what are some aha moments that you've had where you're like, wow, I am a professional. And maybe it's not the word professional, but you're like, I'm in a spot where I feel like I can coach people because I'm a professional, or I'm a professional and I can stick to, premium pricing. Whereas
Yeah.
when you're an amateur, you might have discounted yourself a little bit.
That's a really good question because this is probably something I've experienced more in the recent years. One aha moment for me was when people stop asking you about just your services and start asking if you could provide your knowledge. That's a good indicator that you're heading towards a professional route, or you are a professional, because now you're not just known as like a videographer you're in the contact list as someone that can just put a snazzy video together. Now people are hitting you up being like, hey, we don't even want you to shoot. We don't even want you to bring your camera. Can you come and just show our team how you approach video or how you approach this shoot? That for me was an aha moment. Like, yo, I feel like I should go into the coaching side. Because if people are starting to ask me about my knowledge, like in the DMs or by clients, and I'm definitely not trying to like toot my own horn with that, but at the same time, it's one of those situations where it was an aha moment where I said, maybe this is time to shift gears a little bit in what I'm doing, because I don't want to be just a videographer. I don't want to be just a person that someone hits up for video. I mean, more than that. And I think it's good to be constantly growth minded, but I would definitely say that was an aha moment for me for sure. Yeah.
That's so cool.
What about for you?
Because I don't know about you, but when I was in college, or high school and college, I always heard this word consultant. And I'm like, people pay hourly for someone's knowledge?
Dude, have you seen those TikToks where people are like, hey, like, my friend who's a millennial friend who's a consultant, and they're like, so what do you do for work? And they're like, yo, so I analyze charts, and like they don't even have a clear answer of what they do for work.
It's like, what do you do? Like, what did you do at work yesterday?
Yeah, like,
I talked to my clients. I made sure that they were going the right direction. I love that, because that kind of supports what you're saying, though, where it hit me like 2 years ago when someone's like, you should do a workshop. And I'm like, me? Do a workshop? Like, yeah, like do a beginner photography workshop. And it stretched me in so many different ways, where I had thought I was a professional a few years prior. And now it was this new level of expertise for me where I'm like, I feel like I have graduated into a different area of my craft. So that's cool.
Yeah, no, that's really good. A question that I'd love to ask you is, when it comes to bridging the gap between becoming an amateur and a pro, how much of that do you think is distinguished by your environment? So I guess where my head is at with this, we were talking about my parents earlier and kind of how they started into their journey and raise our family. Like, do you feel like it's a lot harder for people to make that jump when they're maybe in less than ideal situations? Like, how was it for you? Like, how did you, because there's so many external factors, man. Like when you're trying to become a creative, especially freelancer. I mean, freelancer has become more of a sexy term nowadays. But back in the day, if you were a freelancer, people are like, oh, you're broke. Like, you're freelancing, like you're hopping from job to job. Like, you probably don't even have stable income.
Dude, don't get me started on that.
So like, yeah, tell us a little bit about that. How was your environment for you? And like, what role did the external factors play when you were, transitioning?
Yeah. This is amazing. This is a good question, because it came up the other day when I was talking with my wife about just how we were raised.
Yeah.
I was raised by two parents that had stable jobs. And I'm super fortunate that they had stable jobs. And they supported me in my journey as an entrepreneur and as someone who always really ran towards like the creative side versus the analytical and the numbers side. So I feel like for me, my environment was always a healthy environment. But the one thing that I didn't have was people before me that paved the way in entrepreneurship. And I know we're speaking to amateur versus professional, and you don't need to be an entrepreneur, but it's a huge part of my journey. So the driving factor for me was the fact that my parents weren't entrepreneurs and their parents weren't entrepreneurs. So I feel like they set the tone because they taught me how to work and they taught me how to be productive. Just like little things like, yo, you're not doing anything this weekend until homework's done. I'm like, come on, mom. But like for me, I stick to deadlines, right? So as I grew from an amateur to a professional, I contribute a lot to it, to how I was raised. And I think that's something that a lot of people can maybe pull from this conversation right now is I love it when people use their narrative and how they were raised as their mission statement, or to help fuel where they're going.
Yeah.
I mean, because there's so many different ways that you can be a professional, but for me, you know, I feel like it was always set up for me to operate out of a space where, hey, Paul, learn and grow, and if you fail, it's okay. Like, we'll pivot.
Yeah.
So that's kind of a huge part of my journey in becoming that.
Yeah. I think, to be honest, if you're listening to this, and I definitely want to also echo the point where just take for a second and appreciate the fact that you do have a story, because like for us, we're born in the States, and I know there's people who probably listen to this podcast and they're like out of country, they're international, but like where you're born and what family you're born into is literally luck of the draw. Like you have no control over that. There's so many people out there that we're talking about these things about becoming a pro and all this stuff. But to be honest, there's so many people out there that can't even get like a T3I or can't even get the Nifty 50 we're talking about, you know, just because inflation or because their family the infrastructure is not there. So just taking a moment to appreciate like where you are in life, I think can help you, because once you realize that you are actually on the positive side, you actually have the cards in your hand. That is powerful, because a lot of people out there don't have that same opportunity. So I think that's just like a huge detail. But another thing I wanted to hit on was, one thing between an amateur and a pro is that when you're an amateur and you're moving over into becoming a pro or an expert, if you like, one huge indicator for me was massive resistance. And that's why I asked that question a second ago about like your external factors and your stuff, because massive resistance is part of the process. Like if you don't feel any resistance making that transition, it's probably not the right time to transition, or maybe it's late or it's early, whatever. I just feel like when you're making the transition to becoming a pro, resistance is healthy for you, because that's what defines you. That's what defines you as a pro, to be able to problem solve. And resistance is like healthy. And when I realized that I could work alongside resistance and not let it shut me down, is when I was like becoming more of an expert. I felt like I was growing exponentially, because when stuff was hard, I'd be like, okay, I know this feeling. This is familiar. I'm going to like work around it. And that's what makes what makes you a pro. You're a problem solver, right?
Embrace every season in that.
Yeah.
Because I can't tell you how grateful I am for every season of even the years when I was just like sitting, waiting for people to like come into my DMs or my email.
Yeah.
I would get ghosted. And I'm like, oh, what part of my business do I need to change? Or like, what am I doing right? What am I doing wrong? So yeah, I love that you said that, Ed, because you got to embrace those moments and use it to your advantage and have it be a driving factor to get you from like point A to point B.
Yeah. Do you know what's so funny? I just thought to myself, it'd be such a good time to have a sponsorship right now. Just to break up the flow, you know what I mean? Like this is the part where we'll be like, hey, Mid Combo is sponsored by blah, blah, blah.
Yeah.
So,
oh man. And that's what we're looking for, maybe.
Yeah. Maybe that's the next step. Honestly, that makes us pros.
Also, can I just say, if you're an entrepreneur and you're listening to this and you have a startup company, like you don't have a crazy amount of investment capital and you're like, do you know what? I love these guys and also my product is for creatives. If you think that it's something that makes sense with like just the topics that me and Ed speak on, hit us up, because that's a huge part of like Ed, how we just like, I think that's a huge part of our business, and our why is we love coaching. We love, first of all, bringing up other entrepreneurs. So hit us up if you're a startup, but also we are looking for some, like a brand that we feel like is actually going to benefit and be a tool for you guys.
Yeah. We would love to start supporting smaller businesses, but also just getting on board with the Mid Convo podcast, because a lot of people, it's so early stages of this podcast that I feel like any brand that can maybe work with us and see the long-term vision, I feel like can be super mutually beneficial. But Yeah, I mean, those are things that me and Paul would talk about off the mic, but y'all just got a little sneak peek of
And
what
you guys
our
get to
plans
be a
are.
part of
exactly,
it.
Exactly. I want to go back and switch gears a little bit into the amateur and pro. One thing I wanted to mention was people who work a job right now. I love how you said earlier that you don't have to be a freelancer, you don't have to be a business owner to be a professional. Because I know what that's like. I used to work a job at a startup for 2 years. I was a videographer, social media manager, ambassador manager, whatever. I did the whole startup thing for 2 whole years. And
Wow.
I still would have considered myself a professional at that time in my job. So I definitely don't want to discourage or discount anyone who works at a job right now, because you can be a professional in this field or in your field working a job.
And can I share something on that?
Go ahead.
One thing that comes to mind, and again, I'm not the greatest photographer out there, but I do love like speaking into people in their situations.
Yeah.
If you're a professional and you work at a company, or if you work at a company and you are like, am I a professional? Or you want to be? I feel like one of the biggest indicators is like you want to be able to operate and have a position where there's no ceiling, and you can do that at a company. But I love some of these C-suite people at these big companies and people that are higher up that are able to really, I mean, they make big decisions, but also they can make as much as they want to make based off of how they perform. And I think it's a mindset thing. So I think a lot of the people that I would, or at least if I was working a 9-to-5 job, what would make me a professional is when I'm at a point where I'm like, I'm not capped and I'm an expert. For some reason, that's where my mind goes towards, because I believe that people that are professionals are always trying to push the envelope. Like MLB players, they want to be the MVP. They want to go to the All-Star game. Same thing goes for if you're in the workforce.
Dude, that's fire. I love that.
Yeah.
Because a lot of times I agree with you. Like when you're an amateur or you're not quite a professional yet, you play within the bounds that were set for you. And that could be at a company, that could be freelancing. You just don't push the envelope, as in like you think that this is what you're capable of. This is your cap. And I think a professional thinks the opposite. A professional is constantly optimizing, constantly thinking about how to make more money, improve their workflows. Like a professional is someone who, is always pushing the boundaries of what they already know. That's such a big indicator right there. Like actually, that might be one of the most important ones that we've talked about so far on this episode.
You love mindset, just in general.
Yeah.
I know we've talked about this off the mic.
Yeah.
There's a mindset that comes with someone who's a professional. And let's talk to photographers and videographers for a moment. I can tell based off of someone's confidence in their services and how they talk about pricing and how they talk about their clients, where they're at, right? I've also talked to people that are working 9-to-5 jobs that are like, hey, Paul, I'd love coaching on like how I can get a higher paying job under my position. And, maybe you're listening to this and you work at a company and you're like, I need to have a conversation with my boss and tell them that I'm worth more money because of my expertise, because of how much time I put in, and also telling them that, listen, other people want me. I'm getting headhunted, or even if not that, there's other jobs out there that can pay more. Like there has to be a mindset shift. I feel like as someone who's turning into a professional or is like living in it.
Yeah. Confidence levels are huge between a professional and amateur. Because skill set could be the same, but if the confidence levels are not the same, it'll be very clear who the professional is. This can be as small as an email etiquette or as large as, renegotiating a salary at a job. But that is like super important to realize that if you want to become a professional, you have to build confidence. I think as a business owner, as a professional, that's something you can't avoid. And if you notice, most of the successful people in any industry, I would say 9 out of 10 times they're fairly confident individuals. Like you're not going to see a CEO, or you're not going to see a lead engineer. You're not going to see someone who owns a 7-figure business and they're like not confident in themselves, at least to some degree. Everyone, I think you don't want to be like, you don't want to be someone who just has their head blown up and then you just like are literally have no humility at all. We're not talking about that kind of confidence where you're like loathing in yourself. It's more of the confidence of in your skill. Like if I ask Paul right now, or I said, Paul, let's say I'm a brand, and I said, yo, Paul, I got this beverage. I got this beverage that I want to sell. This is my startup company. Can you help me bring it to life? Right? Paul would be confident in being able to do that. And that's the type of confidence I'm talking about. I'm not talking about him being like, oh, I'm the best photographer. It's the confidence in the fact that he has experience, he has knowledge, and he can bring that idea to life. And he's confident he can do so because he's a professional. He's done it before.
Yeah. Wow. Yeah. I like that.
Yeah.
I always use this analogy of a dentist office. I don't know why, but like imagine going to the dentist office and you're not getting the professional experience. Like you walk in, they're just like mute, or you sit down and like everything's all over the place, and like they're not cleaning the tools. Like you never get hit with a bill. Like they're like, sorry, we got things messed up.
Oh,
you know?
What if they get the X-ray, there's like a gaping hole in it, and they'd be like, I think this is a cavity, but you know what? We're gonna just drill in it today. Okay, we're gonna just cut a hole in there.
Totally. But then on like the flip side, it's like I did use this analogy when I was building my business, because I wanted to make sure that I had a professional experience for the people that I came in touch with. Because most likely they've worked with amateurs before, or they've worked with professionals that have just given them a bad experience. So I think there's almost like a standard that we have to hold professionals to, and that's what I'm getting to, where like if you're a professional and you're an entrepreneur, you're an LLC, an S Corp, C Corp, whatever type of entity, like you've taken the leap. If you are working at a company, the way that you present yourself, you're a leader at that company. Like you're leading board meetings. You know, I hate to say it, you're not the one like changing out the coffee pods in the coffee room, right? Even though that season's necessary in order to get to that level. But yeah, I love the analogy of a dentist office, because if you're an amateur and you're like, what the heck are you talking about? I mean, provide the experience that the professional services that you're already experiencing are delivering on.
Yeah.
And I do think reps matter. Like back to professional sports, it's rare that someone goes from high school all the way to the MLB and is all of a sudden like the icon. Like typically they have to go to they go from high school to college, they play in the minors for a couple years, and then they prove themselves and they're professional. So like you also got to love the journey and love the process.
Yeah, dude, I love that. I love how you tied in the coffee pods too, because that season is necessary sometimes.
Hey,
you know?
Real quick, plug coffee sponsor that we could have.
This episode is brought to you by
me and Ed. Here's the deal, guys. We're an open book. Shoot us a DM and ask us a question about where you're at in your journey.
Yeah.
And we'd love to like pour into you. But listen, we want a coffee sponsor because we both drink coffee. And right now, if I had a branded mug that said coffee company name, I'd say, hey, back to the person that's stocking the coffee pods, I'd be like, I just want to let you guys know this is sponsored by.
Dude,
come on, that's what we all need.
I'm dead. Cool. Well, let's start to round out this podcast.
Yep.
We went over some fire tips if you're wondering whether you fall into the amateur category or the professional category, and honestly some practical things you can do to kind of bridge the gap in between. If you're kind of some professional, some amateur, I feel like we give a lot of good tips. However, I want to do this. I read this to Paul yesterday. This is out of a book. I mentioned it a second ago. It's called The War of Art. But this book basically talks about this section I'm about to read for you guys is what makes the difference between an amateur and a professional. Okay, check this out. We do not this is what a professional is. This is someone who's already a pro. A pro does not over-identify with our jobs. We may take pride in our work, we may stay late and come in on weekends, but we recognize that we are not our job descriptions. The amateur, on the other hand, over-identifies with his avocation, his artistic aspiration. He defines himself by it. He is a musician, a painter, a playwright. Resistance loves this. Resistance knows that the amateur composer will never write his symphony because he is overly invested in its success and over-terrified of its failure. The amateur takes it so seriously, it paralyzes him. So that was fire because when I read that, I was like, that's so true. Especially, I feel like it's fitting because we're in the creative industry and creatives love to get caught up in the creative aspirations of things. But at the end of the day, like if you're a professional, you show up, period. Doesn't matter if you don't feel like it. You treat it like a job. You show up every day. You take the means necessary to accomplish the job at hand. And it's not this fairy dust aspiration of this like sexy job of being a creative. And that is a huge takeaway for anyone, I think, trying to become a professional, especially when we're speaking to photographers and videographers, right?
That's a mic drop moment.
Yo.
Hey. And that what's the book called one more time?
It's called The War of Art by Steven Pressfield.
Guys, you already know what to do. Buy that on Amazon.
Hey, link below. JK. But I will say the book is really good if you do want to check it out. There are some parts where I'm like, You know how some books just begin in so aggressive sometimes? Like the author be like, there were at points where I was like, okay, I feel like a little bit too aggressive right now in the way he approached it. But there are some good gems in here if you're dealing with amateur versus pro. But the book is mainly about resistance and why that's healthy, what resistance is, and how you can break through it.
That's amazing.
Yeah, but
so good.
Is there anything else you want to cover before we end this podcast, bro?
I think we touched on a lot of good points. I'd say like if you guys found value from this episode, first of all, check out our previous episodes.
Yeah.
We just did one on Does Your Gear Suck? We've done one with Corey Jenkins, who's an incredible photographer, videographer here in Miami, on just the topic of lighting and a lot of other valuable things.
Yeah.
We got a lot of episodes under our belt that I feel like will kind of complement and supplement this episode. Give us would you say 5 stars?
Yeah, give us that 5-star review, baby. But
and that's on Apple Podcasts.
Yeah, so if you're on Apple Podcasts right now, you can go ahead and leave us a review and leave us a written review, which is awesome. We'd really appreciate it. DM us if you do that because we'd love to chat with you on your feedback. And then if you're on Spotify, it's super easy. You just go to like the podcast profile and you can just rate it. I don't think you can even leave like written reviews right now. You could just give us a 5-star rating. It takes literally 2 seconds. And if you're still listening to this podcast, please.
We love you.
I'm dead.
I love that.
All right.
That's so good.
All right. Well, we'll see you guys in the next episode.
Yo, Thomas, hope all is well.
Hey, Thomas is our video editor.
Appreciate you. You're the GOAT.
Yeah, Thomas, you're the GOAT, bro. If you're listening to this, you don't have to put this in the podcast, but we love you.
All right. See you later, bro.